Hello, welcome to Distinti's fourth edition of the Rules of Acquisition. This is Rule of Acquisition number 34, the Journal Fallacy. And Rule 34.0 is peer-reviewed journals aren't. Now, before you get angry, listen to what I have to say, and I'm going to show you, is that even though peer-reviewed journals, some of them do have peer review, the peer review is not a complete review, and I'll explain why in a minute. And don't mind this. This is a runner from my mutant cactus, which is sitting over here in the window. And the cat is usually over here, and the cactus is over here. Both are sitting in the window. Okay, this presentation will demonstrate many fallacies and misconceptions about journals. The primary myth being that articles published in peer-reviewed journals are credible. I'm going to define that in here, so just I know you're probably getting angry. Just hold on a minute, just see what I have to say. But before we get to that, let's look at the history and true purpose of journals. Okay, journals began about 300 BC. Now, I don't mean before Christ, I mean before computers. Somewhere around 1665. This occurred before the internet, telephone, and telegraph, when there was barely a mail system established. And so what you might have is you might have researchers in different parts of the world, okay, that are all working in the same field, and they kind of want to, and maybe they're at different universities around the world, and they want to keep in touch with each other and what their peers are doing, what their colleagues around the world are doing. And so what they decided to do is they picked an institution, let's say, I don't know, let's say someplace in France, it doesn't really matter. And then they organized, and they got the university to agree to host the journal and set aside resources to publish the journal. And so what happens is all of these researchers around the world would mail in what they're working on, submit their submission to the journal, and the journal staff would, organize and put them into a single printed document, and then they would mail the document back out to everybody, so then everybody can see what everybody else is working on. Now, the universities like this because their students and their faculty now have the ability to keep in touch firsthand with what everybody else around the world is working on. Okay, and so it's a benefit for the university. And other universities, these might be professors at other universities, now they have a copy of the journal. Now all the universities, and so then other universities would host other journals, and they would share the load, as it were. But in these very, very first blogs, the only peer review was for Professor so-and-so over here to say, and send a letter back and say, I disagree with the for whatever reason. And so it was called a post-publishing peer review. The problem with that is no one's under any obligation to peer review. And nobody really wants to peer review, because a lot of times in academia, you get funding based on your publication. The last thing you want is somebody poo-pooing your publication, because that might look good, and maybe if they're right, may not get you the next round of funding. And so if you don't want to get backlash from poo-pooing somebody's article, then you're not going to poo-poo theirs, so they don't poo-poo yours, and then therefore everyone's happy and everyone's published, and so errors are probably largely going to be ignored. So in order to prove credibility, some journals adopted a pre-publication peer review in order to ensure a peer review is done, and do it in such a way that there's no backlash, and get rid of all these silly problems with humanity, jealousy, professional jealousy, grudges, whatever. But there's still a fundamental flaw, a number of fundamental flaws with the current process. Okay, number one, the peer review is shallow. Okay, the peer review process is only a review of the article. There are no provisions for reviewers to set up and run experiments to independently verify results. And this came about when the old cold fusion debacle. The journals don't have the ability to set up and run a cold fusion experiment to verify the results of the article writer. It was actually when that journal article went out, other people said, hey, this is going to be fantastic new energy. And so they all tried to repeat the experiment, and nobody else could get the experiment to run, and it was a big debacle. Because that's part of scientific process, is you got to have other people independently verify it. independently run your experiment. Just reviewing your text of your document is an insufficient review. It is not credible, it's not credible science. And because conclusions and validations of the article are drawn from experimental results, and because reviewers cannot run their own experiments, they have no choice but accept the author's results and conclusion. So what's the point? In other words, they're going to come to your conclusion based on your data. If your data is good or bad or fraudulent, they have no choice but to accept your data, unless, of course, it's outrageously crazy and you know. But for the most part, if you're going to commit a fraud, you're not going to make anything a little bit. You're just going to do things a little more subtly if you want to run a fraud. Okay, so in today's world, it's common for researchers to be under pressure to show scientific progress in order to be awarded the next round of funding. And so without the ability to verify experimental results, the journal reviewers are going to accept on good faith the experimental results of the author. And these two conditions here are the necessary conditions to tempt researchers to embellish experimental results. Okay? You know, it's just like, you know, it's like in school, you know, you have to get the exam to pass, to go to the next level, and sometimes kids are under pressure to cheat. Okay? Everyone is tempted. We're human beings after all. And if you go search scientific journal article frauds, you get 29 million hits. And this one says, Science Magazine, Nature retracts a study of 6 years after an investigation found the protein structure reported were fraudulent. Fraud in Science Journal exposed by study. From Time Magazine, fraud and misconduct in scientific publication, Science Judging. China cracks down after investigation finds massive peer review fraud. Okay? Human beings are human beings, even if they have a FUD attached to their name. Human beings are human beings. And then you have the problem of reviewer incompetence. Okay, wheelchair guy here submitted an article about black holes a number of years ago in a peer-reviewed journal. The article was published. It passed through the peer review. It wasn't until wheelchair guy realized that there was a flaw in the article, and he had to have the article redacted. So, I mean, who's to say that the people reviewing your work are competent enough to adequately review it? There's no guarantee. There's no guarantee of quality or credibility. So what's the point? Okay, so rules of acquisition. Without independent verification of experimental reviews, of experimental results, the review process isn't credible. And that's where we get the basic rule of operation 34.0, peer-reviewed journals aren't. And 34.1, being published in a peer-reviewed journal proves nothing. Just because you're printed in a peer-reviewed journal does not mean your theory is true. Because no amount of experimental validation can prove a theory to be true. First rule of acquisition. Okay, but there are people I've heard, many people time and time again have told me, when I tell them about my things, well, unless you're printed in a peer-reviewed journal, I'm not going to bother with you, blah, 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 blah. In other words, I won't believe anything that's not printed in a peer-reviewed journal. Why? Why is that? Who gave journals the authority to be the gatekeepers of science? Was there an act of Congress? No. Was there an act of God? No. Journals have no authority to be the gatekeepers of science. Remember, journals arose to satisfy a need and are sustained by attracting and maintaining subscribers with like opinions, like any other blog. Without independently validating experiment, journal articles are more opinion than fact, like any other blog. Because journals are really just like a blog. I don't know if I mentioned that before. But it's the same idea. Journals are basically, even back in the 1600s when they first came out, it's basically the same idea as a blog. As people publish to a common area, they all can see each other's publications and they can send in letters of comment. But it's done through letters instead of the internet. So rule of acquisition 34.2, journals have no legal authority to be the gatekeepers of science. The gatekeepers of science is each individual. That comes from the 8th rule of acquisition, which says science is anarchy. There is no governing body of science. There is no law enforcement branch of science that's going to come out and arrest you if you want to believe the earth is flat. Okay. Each person is their own gatekeeper to what they believe the truth to be. And no journal has authority to tell you otherwise. But the problem with journals is they become a cult of stagnant opinions. Okay, the reality is without subscribers, a journal would close, just like any blog. And so journals need to maintain credibility among their subscriber base to maintain their subscriber base. And therefore, they will intentionally not publish articles that disagree with the collective beliefs. It would be like a journal about flat Earth saying, maybe we should consider this round Earth theory. How many people that believe in flat Earth would immediately jump ship and say, I'm going to start my own flat Earth blog. I can't believe this garbage, blah, 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 blah. So if scientists will not believe anything that isn't published in a credible journal, we have a vicious cycle here. Because a journal will only publish what is believed, and the scientists will only believe what is published, and so you have this stagnation of opinion, stagnation of science. So who has the authority? Again, I described this before. Rule of Acquisition 8 says science is anarchy, and the gatekeeper of science is each individual. So and I'm sorry for all this smudge. My printer is in its last legs here. So what's the future? Well, the future is happening right now. There are alternative journals all over the internet, even TV, where you have blogs. You can go to Ken Wheeler's site, you can go to the Electric Universe site, you can go to Ethereal Mechanics, and you can believe by subscribing, and you can support the things that appeal to your beliefs of what you believe the truth to be. And there's even TV channels, I like watching the Ancient Aliens. I don't know if I believe in ancient aliens, but aliens idea, I think I do. But in any event, it's fascinating to listen to the ideas and the concepts. Some of the ideas and concepts they throw out are complete garbage. Other ones are pretty good. So, obviously they're trying to fill airtime, and they don't go for subscribers, they go for viewership so that they can sell ads. So it's the same idea. Everybody's either looking for subscribers or viewership. Okay, and so they have to maintain the interest in order to maintain that viewership. And so with these newer way of doing things, we're attracting subscribers or viewers to the appeal of the new idea rather than just trying to appeal to the collective. Instead of preaching to the choir and saying, yes, we believe in relativity, therefore we are credible and you must sign up with us so we can tell you more about relativity, and go absolutely nowhere, continually telling you about relativity and stomping out any dissenting ideas. Okay, again, in the rule of acquisition 34.3, anyone can start a journal, which today is a blog. And some people say, well, what about charlatans? Yeah, there's always going to be scam artists in all aspects of life. In a free market, which the internet is still kind of like a free market, there's going to be lying, rotten thieves all over the place. But there's also going to be access to honorable, credible organizations. But again, you are the gatekeeper. You have to decide. Because some people would say, oh, we should write laws to suppress these charlatans. Well, how do you know they're wrong? How do you know? You can't know. They might actually be right. And the last thing we want to do is write laws that would turn ourselves into a totalitarian society where the government becomes a lying, rotten thief. Because governments do not like competition, they're going to ban everybody else. Okay, and what I've shown before with the search, journals are not free of fraud in spite of their quote-unquote false credibility. So in the new way, instead of having a central authority deciding what everybody thinks, which is kind of where people in science think the way science is done, with the journal telling everybody, this is the truth. Grapefruits are supposed to be eaten in the morning and only in halves. That was an old Stella D'Oro breadstick commercial, which I used to love, where they're trying to sell you Stella D'Oro breadsticks and try to get you to eat them any time of day, not just breakfast. And so the new paradigm is everybody, all of these different little blogs are all each going their own different way. Eventually, now granted, you're going to have a lot more wrong blogs, obviously, but the probability that one of them is going to have a eureka moment and strike gold is higher probability, bigger probability, larger probability. Okay, so the conclusion is 34.0, peer-reviewed journals aren't. They aren't credible because they do no experimental validation, and so they are not, because of that, they are not free from fraud. They are at the mercy of whatever experimental data is presented to them in the paper. Maybe we should fix that. Maybe we should give journals funding so that they can rerun people's experiments. Now, I don't know how the journal is going to set up their own CERN accelerator to repeat the experiment from CERN, or how they're going to run their own Gravity 1 probe so that they can repeat the experiments from gravity. I don't know. But until somebody else independently verifies, all of these things that come out of CERN and all of these things that come out of the Gravity 1 probe are all suspect until they can be independently verified. Okay? Peer-reviewed journals aren't free to consider theories that contradict the beliefs of the collective because they worry about credibility. Whereas most of your internet blog sites, they got people screaming at them all the time. Oh, you're a charlatan, you don't know what you're talking about. Blah, blah, blah. I hear that all the time on my blog. Okay, and peer-reviewed journals are not the gatekeepers of science, and peer-reviewed journals are not the future. And maybe that's a little bit, because I would say that the new peer-reviewed journal is going to be the internet blog that has comments, and people can comment live. Matter of fact, some journals are actually going to this open comment, which making them look more like a blog. So, they're basically going right to the same way of the blog, so what's the point? Thank you. No more voodoo physics or imaginary math.